14. She's 14. 14 years old. I'll get out of your way. Okay. Before I move to Carver's introduction, I want to bring your attention. Carver refused to take an honorarium for this gathering here today. So the Garden elected instead to ask all of you to participate in a special offering on behalf of Carver to Henri, Levaufray. Sure, okay. He was only 14 years old when the Normandy invasion occurred in 1944. His home in the town of Perrier had been occupied by the Germans since 1940, and his family lived through an unbelievable experience. The town was bombed, his home was destroyed, and many of his teachers and classmates were killed. As a boy, Henri and his brothers combed the countryside for artifacts the soldiers had left behind, and these were the beginning of his lifelong career as a French historian. Not only that, but he has taken special interest in the 90th Division, which is the division that Carver was in. If you have been on one of these trips with Carver, you know that Henri is an amazing man, and we wish to continue his efforts to honor the memory of those who have gone before us in World War II. So all it takes is writing a check to the Garden, put Henri in the memo line, or if you give online, there'll be a way for you to do that as well. So we just wish to keep this memory alive because it's an amazing experience. I want to encourage you to take a moment to go ahead and read the bio from Carver in the program there, because I'm going to invite Carver up here because I just had this idea that can you come up, Carver? I'm just curious, as Carver comes forth here, if Carver did your wedding, it doesn't matter the first, the eighth, the third, it doesn't matter. Would you please stand? I know of one of these already. If Carver baptized you, will you please stand? There's one. If Carver baptized your children, will you please stand? There's two here today. If Carver was with your family during a challenging time, either a loss or a difficult time, or he helped you through a difficult time, would you please stand? And finally, if you have been to Normandy with Carver, would you please stand? And I want you all to remain standing. If Carver has had an impact on your life, would you please stand? Carver, it's not many times that a pastor has the opportunity to see what a difference they make in the world. But please just take a moment here and see how you have impacted so many of our lives. I give God thanks for you and your amazing ministry. Ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Dr. Carver McGriff. Danny's going to get you set up here.
When you get old, you'll find out it's better to sit than to stand. I'm glad to be here. This place is filled with so much energy. Caroline, did you say Caroline or Carolyn? Caroline, what a voice you have. You're going to be, I want to see one of your movies when you get there. And these guys back here, the ones who... I love to hear them play, and I'm glad to be here. Well, I'm going to use a passage of Scripture from the Sermon on the Mount, the 5th chapter of Matthew, and Jesus said, and this is relevant to what I want to say today, I tell you, love your enemies, and pray for those who mistreat you, so that you will become the sons of your Father in heaven. You know, I want to make an open comment. I watched all this, and I remember when someone asked Winston Churchill, when he was an old man, if he could go back and relive 1 year of his life, what year would that be? And he said, without question, 1940. Now, that was the worst year of the war for England. That was the year of the Battle of Britain and the rescue at Dunkirk and so many other things. What was it about that? Well, I know what it was because it was the same for all of us in World War II. We were together on the same team. Neighbors loved their neighbors, and we all respected the people who led us. It was a time of all being together on the same team. I kind of miss that. I want to start this morning with something from, it's a letter that was written by a young woman to her young husband. It's in a book by Leo Biscaglia. Remember the day I borrowed your brand new car and I dented it. I thought you'd kill me, but you didn't. And remember the time I dragged you to the beach and you said it would rain, and it did. I thought you would say, I told you so, but you didn't. And remember the time remember the time I flirted with all the guys to make you jealous, and you were. I thought you'd leave me, but you didn't. And remember the time I forgot to tell you the dance was formal and you showed up in jeans? I thought you'd drop me, but you didn't. Yes, there were lots of things you didn't do, but you put up with me, and you loved me, and you protected me. There were lots of things I wanted to make up to you when you returned from Vietnam, but you didn't. That's what our enemies do to us. They kill love. That was a broken heart that would probably never be completely healed. And Jesus said, love your enemies. You got to be kidding. I remember vividly walking up on the beach, now known as Utah Beach, in 1944, to join up with my infantry division, and the first thing I remember seeing as I walked on the sand was the body of a dead American paratrooper. He'd been with the 101st Airborne Division. He'd spent 2 years training for that moment to arrive in Normandy, and he lasted less than a day. What a waste. And you know, I thought, even right now, his mother and dad may very well be seated at breakfast table, holding hands and praying that their son would come home safely. And I knew he wouldn't. And Jesus said, love your enemies. Some of you have been on our voyage to Normandy so that we could look back and remember what was done for us. If you're there, you see a beautiful plain that's green grass. It looks like it's maintained like a putting green, hundreds of acres. And you would see 9,300 and some white crosses there, gleaming in the sunlight. And on each cross is the name of a boy who gave his life for our freedom. We go around and each person there takes one of those crosses and we look at it and we say the name of the boy. It tells where he came from, what unit he served, and when he died. You know what the age of the boys on Omaha Beach were? Somebody figured this out. More than 1,000 died that day. Average age 20 and a half. And back then you had to be 21 to be called an adult. Boys, all killed. And Jesus said, love your enemies. And I think, you've got to be kidding. I stand there and I look at those markers and I think for every one of them there was a mother and a father, a girlfriend. Think of all the unborn children because these men died. They were killed by the enemy, whom we are asked by Jesus to love. Well, then we get on a bus and we go over to a German cemetery that is nearby, and there are some 20,000 dead German boys buried there, and we do the same thing. We go, each one of us, by ourselves, we go find a grave of one German boy, we say his name. Somewhere at some time in history, his mother and dad have grieved over his loss. And I think of all the massive amount of hurt that has been inflicted by these people here. And I reflect on the fact that the boys in that first cemetery killed all these men. Why? Because it was an act of love. And I mean exactly that. Let me read something to you that the Apostle Paul wrote regarding love. He wrote probably the most beautiful passage ever written. And part of it, he said this: love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or conceited or proud. Love is not ill-mannered or selfish or irritable. Love does not keep a record of wrongs. Love is not happy with evil, but is happy with the truth. Love never gives up. Its faith, hope, and patience never fail. That's the kind of love that Jesus was talking about. Not the kind of love that we sometimes mean when we use the phrase here and say we love, I used to say love Colts games. But we love hot dogs and we love going to the beach and all of these things. But he's using the word love in a more profound sense. When you love someone, you don't allow them to commit a wrong if you can prevent them. And as I stood in that German cemetery, and I thought, these boys, every one of them, it's somebody for whom Jesus Christ died to save, just as the boys in the first cemetery. And I realized that we had to kill them because we had to prevent them from doing any more damage to the world. They were part of an evil, dark force that was sweeping across all of Europe, and it had to be stopped. And for the sake of humanity, that must be done at the expense of those lives. But we did that for the right reasons. And this is what love leads us to do. Love doesn't allow you to put up with wrongdoing by the person you love. If your little boy wants to throw a rock through the neighbor's window, you don't allow him to do it because you love him. And I began to realize this is what Jesus was talking about. I have a story to tell you, but many of you know the story, but let me tell it for the other people here. I met a man at a meeting a few years ago. His name is Bob Levine. Bob is Jewish. And that's important for you to know, for me to tell you what happened. Bob was in the same unit in which I served. He was badly wounded in action in Normandy. And he was dragged into a barn by some of the Germans. He had been captured. And you might want to know that the officers in the unit that we were fighting against were SS troops. They were the bad guys. They would not have allowed a Jew to be saved if they had known he was Jewish. But still, a doctor came, a German doctor, and gave Bob Levine medical care. And when he finally arrived in the hospital and he awakened, he was horrified to look down and see that one foot had been amputated. And not only that, but his dog tags were missing. Those are the little plates that we would wear around our neck to identify who we were. Our name was there and our religion was there. And Bob's were missing. And Bob Levine was horrified to realize what had happened. But when he reached in his pocket, he found there a note from the doctor who had given him medical care, saying that he was very, very sorry he had to do it, but he had to cut Bob's foot off in order to save his life. And also, Bob found there his dog tags. And when he tells the story now, he says that that doctor saved his life in two ways. One by saving his life with medical care, and the other by saving the dog tags from being seen by the enemy officers. Well, Bob survived the war, moved to New Jersey, had a successful life. And one day he and his wife decided they would like to go back to Germany and try to find that doctor and thank him for what he had done. They went to France and they met the man that Carolyn mentioned just a few moments ago, Henri Levofre. And by the way, Henri is really Henry, Henri. And together they were able to locate where that doctor had lived. The paper that Bob had found in his pocket had the name of the unit that he had served and the man's name, so they were finally able to find the town in Germany which had not been bombed and destroyed like so much of it was. And they went to his home to find that the doctor had died, but Bob and his wife met the doctor's family, and they got acquainted with them, and they became friends with them. And Bob was recently interviewed by a newspaper in New Jersey, and I saw a copy of this, in which Bob referred to those German people as his extended family. Bob had reached back across that chasm of hatred with an act of love for the doctor who had reached across that chasm of hatred with an act of love. One day, the doctor's granddaughter said she'd always wanted to go to America and go to college. And Bob said, then you come over and live with us and go to school. And she did. And when I heard that story, I thought, that's what Jesus is talking about. You love your enemy, not by standing aside and letting him or her do some evil deed, not by letting somebody do a wrong for anyone else, but you stop them from doing it, and that is in itself an act of love. And then I began to see what Jesus meant when he said, love your enemy. And our country did that. We helped restore the German nation. We prevented them from continuing in their hateful work, but now we have helped them recreate a nation which have become our friends. And I am so happy to say that I have a stepdaughter who moved to Germany a number of years ago, and she wanted to tell people about the love of Jesus Christ. She met a fine German boy. They got married. They had two little boys, Sam and Luke, and a month ago, Sarah had little Olivia. I call her Ollie. And now, after all these years, I have 3 German grandchildren, and I love them. That's what Jesus meant.